Okay, so we're up to day 179 of going through my old journal. But before I get on with that, there was something that I kept thinking that I wanted to add on to what I talked about yesterday. And yesterday was about, feeling valued and appreciated. And I had kind of brought up, how there's a lot of kids these days, specifically like millennials and maybe some Gen Z, that weren't feeling so like valued and appreciated by their parents. And so they're kind of like becoming estranged from their parents. And I talked about how, my dad wanted me to succeed, but it wasn't for my own benefit. It was for his benefit and for bragging rights. And so I was lucky to have him, but also like my grandfather, because my grandfather was really big on like, you have to get your education, you have to get your education. But it wasn't like in a way that, it was a way like you just knew that like he was saying that like not for his benefit but for my benefit. He understood that like, at least in that time, before tuition prices went like way through the roof, like he knew that like getting an education was a way to like have a better life. And so I've been reading this book and I've been talking about it like the last few days, but it's such an interesting book. It's called Worlds Apart. And the author is, who is it? Cynthia Duncan. And it was written in the 90s, I think. Yeah, published in 1999. And she did these interviews with people in kind of these poor regions in the US in the early 90s. And most of the book is like, it's got quotes from people that she had talked to. And she was talking to this one lady, and the lady was basically like, we grew up poor, and so there wasn't really a lot of opportunities for me. There's this big divide in the schools between like the rich kids and the poor kids, even within the same school. Like the groups didn't really mix. And she was like, I loved school, I loved history, I loved learning. And like she, but then she got in with the wrong crowd, got in trouble, ended up dropping out of school, getting pregnant, and all this stuff. But the way she talks about like her kids and what she wants for her kids, like I feel like that's kind of how my grandpa felt about me. And she said, I just wanted to read some of this because like I read it today and I just think it's so interesting. She says, I want them not to drop out, not to end up sitting on the porch all day. I want my girl not to marry and get pregnant too young, but to have a good family when she's ready. And then my boys, I don't want them to have children and go to work and barely be able to feed them or barely be able to put diapers on them and just have to scrounge like Billy and myself. So Billy was her husband. And she said, my daughter, if she does marry, that's great, but I would like her to have her own job and car of her own, know how to drive, and not be totally dependent on a man. My boys, I don't want them working in the mines. So this is in, I assume it's Kentucky. They say Appalachian. They're not really specific on exactly the town, and they change the names and everything. But basically the big industry in this town is the coal mines. So I don't want my boys to work in the mines. I want them to do better for themselves. They don't have to be doctors, lawyers. They can be teachers, nurses, social workers, even like restaurant work. Maybe they go in and be an operator, owner of it, but just not work in it as hard, scrounging everyday job to get by. And then she goes on to say, she talks about how being poor like put a strain on her and her husband's relationship, and how, he wanted to be able to provide more for her, but like it just really wasn't possible. And she knew that he got frustrated because he couldn't. And then I like what she said here. She says, more than likely, I won't get to do what I want to do until really later in life. And even then, I may not get the chance. But what I see for myself is seeing that my children, and then she has this part in here, says, not live my life through my children, but see that my children do have the opportunity in their life to do something, make something of themselves. And like, yeah, I feel like, I don't know, there's not like really a lot of parents, well, I don't know, but I feel like that's the way. Like you want your child to do well for them. And I think there was just too many parents back in the day that like their purpose wasn't to get their children to do well for their children's sake. It was for their sake. And so at least in my experience personally. But thankfully, I did have someone in my life that was more like her, that did encourage us to do well, because they legitimately wanted to see us do well, to have a good life, to have a better life. And like, even with my grandpa, like, if I wanted to travel or I talked about that, he would encourage it. He'd be like, yes, you don't want to get to my age and like not, do all these things that you wanted to do and regret it. And like my dad, when I had the opportunity to go intern at Disney, he was so against it. He was like, not necessarily against me traveling completely, but anything that he thought would derail me from like going to medical school, he just would push against it. Like, I think he liked if I would like travel to like Europe and stuff, because he could tell his friends, oh, my daughter's a world traveler, or whatever. But anyway, that's that. So let's get into day 179 now. So the quote for day 179 says, to plant a garden is to believe in tomorrow. What are you planting in the garden of your life that will better your tomorrow? So I guess this kind of goes along with that a little bit. So if you're following along, just take a minute to think about how you would respond, and I will read what I wrote. So I said, I don't know. This must have been a week where I wasn't really, there were some days in particular that I really remember like, my brain's not working today. I don't know what I'm going to write on these, and I struggled. And I can tell usually the days that start with I don't know. I said, I feel like I've been planting seeds my whole life without knowing what I'm planting. I feel like things have been growing and I've made some progress in my garden, but I'm not sure that I've been properly caring for it. Partially because I don't know exactly what I'm growing. It's like I've been randomly tossing seeds out there, just waiting to see what grows. At this point, I'm starting to wonder if there will ever be a harvest. Or will I just keep growing this messy garden without ever reaping any reward? On the one hand, I have put quite a bit of time and energy into my garden, but not enough to feel locked into only growing one kind of fruit. And I've talked about this a lot, of how I don't know what my major goal is in life. I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm scared to commit to just one thing, because what if I like put all of this effort and energy into this one thing and I end up hating it? So there is like some good part about having all these options and being free to choose between these options. Like, maybe my life would be easier if I just, there was a path already set for me, and I'm like, okay, this is my path, this is what I'm gonna do. But I don't know if I'd be happy with that either. So I'm stressed both ways. If I had like a path set for me, then I don't know if I'd be happy with that. But now that I've got all these options, like, there's a stress in like having all these options and a fear to like just jumping into one. So I said, on the one hand, so I already read that, not being locked into growing any one kind of fruit. I said, I'm hoping to finally decide on which fruit to focus on and to excel at growing. Just not sure if I'll ever be able to settle on just one. In the meantime, I'll keep tending my garden with enough effort to keep it from becoming overrun and destroyed, but hoping for the day that I have the time and resources to help it flourish. I'd say that's accurate. But I will say, just by kind of like randomly throwing seeds around, and just kind of doing things that I'm interested in, even though it seems random and all over the place, like, somehow, without me even like trying, I feel like I am being kind of like pushed towards some sort of path. I just don't know what it is. I'm just kind of playing it by ear. So we'll see. I'm hoping that when I finish my PhD, I will really be able to take some time and figure some things out, or figure out what to do. But yeah, I mean, I'm glad that I have options, at least. because like in that book, you know, a lot of the coal miners are feeling really stressed because they keep having layoffs, and you know, this is all that them from generations their family's been doing. And you know, that was just the expectation that like, okay, my dad was a coal miner, I'm going to be a coal miner. But a lot of people are recognizing like that's not going to be the future, and so they've invested, like this is all they know. And so like, I guess I don't have too much stress on like things going bad right now, even though things are going pretty bad in the world, because I have planted so many seeds all over the place. Like I have a lot of experience doing a lot of different things. So I guess my hope now is that like, I'm glad I'm in this place. So if something does fall through with my job, I'm like, well, I've worked all these different kinds of jobs, and I've gained all of these different skills in all of these different areas. From my current job, I've gained a lot of skills and a lot of different things that I could use towards something else. So I'm glad that I have options. So yeah, I mean, I'm not, it's, I don't know, if I put all my effort into one thing, yeah, I could be like really being successful at one thing right now, but I don't think I'd be happy at that. I'm kind of glad, because that could all come crashing down, you know, one day. And that happened with my roommate. Like his dad had worked at a factory his whole life, and he got a job at a factory. His brother was working at a factory, and then he lost that job and wasn't able to get hired, and he had to do a major pivot in his life. And it's turned out well for him, but it was really, you know, scary, is what he's told me, for, you know, a few months until he, you know, figured out what to do. So yeah, and overall he's kind of happy that that happened, that he had that happen when he was so young, that he was young enough to like be able to make a pivot like that. Because even today, if he would have kept working at the factory, you know, it's used to be a good stable job to do that, but it's less and less. You don't know when you're going to get laid off. And even in these other jobs that used to be stable, like my mom worked at her job for 30 years, and you know, used to, you would have a pension and you felt really secure in your job, and it's not anymore. I'm sorry, I keep going off track about like labor and work and all this stuff. I think that's just because it's been on my mind a lot lately. If you're watching this, I don't know when you're watching this, it's January 21st, 2023. We've been through a pandemic. We've been through some crazy, you know, elections and events, and now we're having inflation, and things just are seeming very unstable. It's just kind of a weird time. So given what's going on right now, I am glad at what the path that I've taken, and kind of like developing a lot of different skills. So yeah, anyway, I would encourage that. I would encourage to like learn as much as you can. There's thankfully we have the internet, and there's a lot of like free information available. If you want to develop a skill online, you can do it pretty affordably if you just put the time into it, I think. But I don't know, or maybe that's just me. I'm just the type that's just I get really interested in a lot of different things, and I can like jump in and deep dive into things. But I'm realizing more and more that like not everybody's brain works like mine, and so I don't know. Anyway, that's what I have for that day. I will be back tomorrow with day 180.